The great hall of Nexus Prime had never seen such a gathering. Representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy sat around the massive circular table. Their forms varied wildly. Some were tall and proud, others floated like living energy, and a few looked like walking mountains of armor and muscle. But today, fear united them all. Admiral Zextar of the Krathan Empire stood first. His blue skin gleamed under the station's lights, and his 4 arms gestured dramatically as he spoke. "The Void Swarm has broken through our outer defenses," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority. 3 star systems have already fallen. If we do not act now, the core worlds will be next. Murmurs filled the chamber. The Void Swarm was every civilization's nightmare, a collection of machines that consumed everything in their path. They turned planets into raw materials and ships into more of themselves. No one knew where they came from, but everyone knew what they did. High Curator Velanathi spoke next. The ethereal being's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once, our calculations show the swarm will reach the Centaurus sector within 30 rotations. We must combine our fleets immediately. War Prime Gorth slammed his massive fist on the table. The Brutaxi warrior's armor made a loud clang that echoed through the hall. "The clans are ready," he growled. "We bring 2,000 heavy siege platforms. Our planet crackers will tear them apart." Chancellor Kylin of the Sylvani Federation moved with grace as she stood. Her people looked like living trees, but their bioships were among the most advanced in the galaxy. The Federation offers 1,500 biovessels. Our living ships can adapt and heal during battle. One by one, each representative stood and declared their contribution. The numbers were staggering. The Krathan brought 8,000 dreadnoughts. The Ethereals offered 3,000 reality-bending warships. The Vorthan Collective promised 6,000 plasma destroyers. The Nexari Defense Force added 4,000 shield-carriers. As each species made their announcement, the mood in the room grew more confident. This would be the largest fleet ever assembled. Surely nothing could stand against such combined might. Then the chamber doors opened with a soft hiss. Captain Jack Ryan walked in, and the room fell silent. He was human, a species most of the others barely knew existed. His uniform was simple and practical, nothing like the ornate dress of the alien commanders. Behind him walked Communications Officer Amy Collins, equally unremarkable in her plain gray outfit. Jack was not young, and his face showed the lines of someone who had seen difficult times. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes held a steady calm that seemed out of place in the tense atmosphere. He walked to the only empty seat at the great table and sat down without ceremony. Admiral Zextar looked down at the human with barely hidden disdain. "Ah yes, the humans. We almost forgot about you." Several aliens chuckled at this. "Tell us, Captain Ryan, what does Earth contribute to our great alliance?" Jack looked around the table at all the alien faces staring at him. Some looked curious, others amused, and a few seemed annoyed that their time was being wasted. He cleared his throat and spoke in a voice that was neither loud nor soft, but somehow carried clearly to every corner of the hall. "We're sending one ship." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter began. War Prime Gorth's booming laugh shook the table. "One ship?" he roared. "Did you perhaps miscount, little human?" High Curator Valanathi's ethereal voice carried a note of what might have been pity. "Perhaps your species should consider evacuation instead of playing at war." Chancellor Kylin tried to be more diplomatic. "Captain Ryan, surely you mean one fleet of ships? Perhaps the translation is unclear?" But Admiral Zextar was not so kind. "One ship," he repeated, his forearms spreading wide in mock amazement. "Against a swarm that has consumed entire star systems. Tell me, Captain, do you plan to ram them? Perhaps throw harsh words at them? The laughter grew louder. Even the usually serious Nexari representatives were smiling behind their breathing. Masks. Amy Collins's face grew red with anger, but Jack remained perfectly calm. The U's defiance will be at the rally point, Jack said simply. Here are our tactical frequencies and coordination protocols. He placed a small data pad on the table. We'll see you there. One ship, Admiral Zextar repeated again, shaking his head. This is why primitive species should leave warfare to their betters. Perhaps you should observe from a safe distance and learn how real militaries fight. Jack stood up slowly. Amy followed his lead, though her hands were clenched into fists. We'll be there, Jack said again. The defiance will do its part. As the two humans walked toward the exit, the alien. Laughter followed them. Someone Jack couldn't tell who shouted, "Try not to get in our way, humans. We wouldn't want you to get hurt." The doors closed behind them with another soft hiss, cutting off the sound of alien amusement. Meanwhile, in Earth's orbital shipyard, Engineer Steve Martinez ran his hands over the hull of the UESS Defiance. The ship was 800 meters long, respectable by human standards, but tiny compared to the massive alien dreadnoughts. To most observers, it looked like a standard human cruiser. With basic weapons and simple armor plating, Steve smiled as he watched his team make final preparations. The aliens had no idea what they were really looking at. They saw a small, unremarkable ship from a primitive species. They had no way of knowing what humanity had actually built. The Defiance looked ordinary on purpose. But looks, as the galaxy was about to learn, could be very deceiving indeed, got in a few days. When the greatest fleet in galactic history faced an enemy that had destroyed everything in its path, they would understand why humanity had sent only one ship. One ship was all they needed. The Kepler Nebula had never seen anything like it. Ships stretched across space as far as sensors could reach. The greatest military force in galactic history hung in the void like a metal constellation, waiting for orders. Captain Jack Ryan stood on the bridge of the UESS Defiance and watched the alien fleet through the main view screen. Even he had to admit it was impressive. The Krathan dreadnoughts looked like flying cities, each one bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon. The ethereal vessels seemed to fade in and out of reality, their energy hulls shimmering like mirages. The Brutaxi siege platforms were massive rectangles of armor and guns that could probably survive flying into a star. "Sir, the Sylvani bioships are beautiful," said pilot Linda Park from her station. The living vessels moved through space like graceful whales, their organic hulls pulsing with soft light. "They look alive." "That's because they are," replied Tactical Officer Chris Morgan. He was studying the fleet formations on his display. According to the briefings, those ships can actually think for themselves. Weapons Officer Ben Clark whistled softly. "Look at the size of those Krathan cannons. Each one is bigger than our entire ship." Navigation Officer Carol Hayes looked up from her console with a frown. "Captain, we're being assigned to Grid 77 Alpha." Jack checked the tactical display. Grid 77 Alpha was at the very back of the formation, behind the supply ships and medical vessels. "I see. Put us there, Carol." "Sir," Chris said carefully, "that's the rear guard position. We're being placed with the support craft." "I know where we're being placed, Mr. Morgan." The communications panel chirped. Amy Collins opened the channel, and Admiral Zextar's voice filled the bridge. The Krathan commander didn't bother with pleasantries. "Human vessel, you will maintain position in the rear formation. Do not advance beyond the medical ships under any circumstances. We cannot have you wandering into the battle zone where real warships are operating." "Understood," Jack replied calmly. "Try to stay out of the way, Captain. This is a job for actual military forces. The channel closed. Amy's face was red again, and several other crew members looked angry. Jack remained perfectly calm. Sir, Ben sighed, maybe we should ask for a forward position. We can fight. We're exactly where we need to be, Mr. Clark. Before anyone could respond, long-range sensors began screaming warnings. Carol's hands flew over her controls as data poured across her screens. Contact, she announced. Multiple contacts at the edge of sensor range. They're huge, sir. The main view screen shifted to show the sensor readings. At first, it looked like a storm front moving through space. Then the resolution improved, and everyone on the bridge fell silent. The void swarm stretched across several light years. It wasn't a fleet. It was a living wall of metal and death. Millions of mechanical shapes moved together like a school of steel fish. Some were small and fast, darting through space like angry wasps. Others were massive, slowly grinding forward like mechanical mountains. My God, Linda whispered. Communications channels across the Allied fleet exploded with chatter. Admiral. Zextar's voice cut through the noise on the command frequency. All ships, battle stations, form attack formations Alpha through Delta. Prepare for engagement in 6 hours. The alien fleet began to move. The Krafen dreadnoughts took the center, their quantum torpedo tubes glowing with deadly energy. The ethereal ships spread out on the flanks, ready to phase strike from impossible angles. The Brutaxi siege platforms formed a solid wall of armor and guns. The Sylvani bioships positioned themselves for support and rapid response. It was a textbook formation, the kind taught in military academies across the galaxy. 50,000 ships arranged in perfect order, each one in its designated position. The aliens had done this before, many times. Captain, Amy said, we're receiving a transmission from the Sylvani flagship. Chancellor Kylin appeared on the view screen. Her tree-like features showed what might have been kindness. Captain Ryan, my bioships have room in their medical bays. If you wish to evacuate your crew before the battle begins, we would be honored to keep them safe. Thank you, Chancellor, but we'll be staying with our ship. I understand your pride, Captain, but this enemy has destroyed entire civilizations. There is no shame in recognizing when you are outmatched. We appreciate the offer. The Chancellor's expression grew sad. Very well. May fortune smile upon you, brave humans. As the channel closed, more communications came in. War Prime Gorth sent a brief message. Try not to die too quickly, little ship. High Curator Velinafi offered philosophical comfort about humanities. Noble but doomed gesture. Each message was meant to be kind, but they all said the same thing. The humans didn't belong here. Sir, Chris said quietly, the tactical analysis is coming in. The swarm has at least 40 million individual units. Some of those big ones are the size of small moons. What about their capabilities? Jack asked. Carol pulled up the intelligence. Reports. Previous encounters show they adapt quickly. The Rigel Defense Force hit them with plasma cannons. Within hours, the swarm developed plasma-resistant armor. The Vegan Republic tried antimatter warheads. The swarm learned to absorb the energy and use it for propulsion. They learn, Jack said thoughtfully. Yes, sir. Every weapon used against them becomes less effective over time. Eventually, it stops working entirely. Linda turned in her chair. Captain, how are we supposed to fight something like that? If they can adapt to any weapon, We'll manage, Miss Park. The hours passed slowly. The Allied fleet continued its preparations while the void swarm drew closer. Weapons were charged, shields were raised, and final battle plans were distributed. The aliens tested their communications and ran combat drills with the precision of professional military forces. On the Defiance, the small human crew watched and waited. They ran their own checks, but quietly, without the fanfare of the alien fleets. Jack stood at the center of his bridge, studying the tactical displays, with the patience of someone who had done this before. "Sir," Carol said during the final hour before contact, "I've been analyzing the swarm's approach vector. Something seems odd." "What do you mean?" "Their formation looks random, but there's a pattern underneath. It's like they're probing for something." "Specific," Jack nodded. "Keep monitoring it." Admiral Zextar's voice boomed across all frequencies. "All ships, prepare for combat. Show this mechanical plague the power of united civilizations." The alien fleet began to move forward. Engines that could power entire planets pushed the massive warships toward the approaching swarm. The greatest military force ever assembled was about to meet an enemy that had never been defeated. In the rear guard, the UEC Defiance followed at a respectful distance. To any observer, it looked like a small ship trying to stay out of the way while better forces did the real fighting. But Jack Ryan stood calmly on his bridge, watching the approaching battle with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. The galaxy had laughed at humanity's one ship. Very soon, they would understand why one ship was all that humanity needed to send. The first salvo from the Allied fleet lit up space like a newborn star. 50,000 warships fired at once, and the result was beautiful and terrible to see. Admiral Zextar's dreadnoughts launched their quantum torpedoes first. The weapons tore through space, leaving trails of twisted reality behind them. When they hit the front edge of the void swarm, entire sections of mechanical ships simply stopped existing. Matter became energy, energy became nothing, and hundreds of swarm units vanished in brilliant flashes. Direct hits across the line. Zextar's voice boomed over the communications channels. "All batteries, continue firing." The ethereal ships struck next. High Curator Velanathi's vessels phased out of normal space and appeared inside the swarm formation. Their reality-bending weapons reached into other dimensions and pulled the swarm ships apart from the inside. Metal screamed as it was forced to exist in two places at once, then shattered into pieces that fell through holes in space itself. Warprime Gorth's siege platforms opened fire with their gravity crushers. The massive weapons created tiny black holes that pulled swarm ships into impossibly small points before releasing them as showers of metallic dust. Each shot destroyed dozens of enemy vessels, leaving empty spots in the swarm's formation like missing teeth. The Sylvani bioships added their own deadly beauty to the battle. Living projectiles shot through space like angry comets, seeking out swarm ships and exploding into clouds of acid that ate through metal hulls. The bioships themselves danced through the enemy formation, their organic armor regenerating any damage they took. On the bridge of the Defiance, the human crew watched the spectacular display with wide eyes. The alien weapons were beyond anything Earth had ever dreamed of building. Each shot was like watching gods at war. "Look at those explosions," Ben Clark whispered from his weapons station. "Those quantum torpedoes just erased a chunk of space." "The ethereal phase strikes are incredible," added Chris Morgan. "They're attacking from dimensions we can't even see." Carol Hayes monitored the tactical display from her navigation console. "The swarm is taking heavy losses. We've destroyed maybe 100,000 units in the first hour." Communications Officer Amy Collins looked up from her station. "Sir, we're getting celebration messages from the alien flagships. Admiral Zextar says the battle is going better than expected." Captain Jack Ryan stood in the center of his bridge, watching the view screen with calm eyes. "Keep monitoring," he said quietly. The alien celebration continued for another hour. The combined fleet pressed forward, their weapons cutting deep into the swarm formation. The Krathan commanders, were already talking about victory. The Ethereals spoke of this battle becoming legend. The Brutaxi roared with battle joy as their weapons tore through enemy ranks. But then something changed. The quantum torpedoes fired their next salvo, and the explosions were smaller. Not by much, but enough to notice. The Krathen gunners increased power and fired again. This time, the swarm ships being hit didn't disappear completely. Some of them survived the reality-tearing weapons and kept moving. What's happening? Admiral Zexstar demanded over the communications channel. Engineering report. Sir, our weapons are functioning perfectly, came the reply. But the enemy ships seemed to be resistant. High Curator Valinathi's ethereal voice carried worry for the first time. My phase strikes are becoming less effective. The swarm appears to be adapting to dimensional warfare. Within the void swarm, mechanical minds worked at speeds beyond organic understanding. Every weapon that hit them was analyzed, studied, and countered. The swarm ships began growing new armor specifically designed to resist quantum torpedoes. They developed shields that could detect phase strikes before they happened. They created gravity wells that turned the Brutaxi weapons against themselves. War Prime. Gorth watched his gravity crushers lose their power. Impossible, he roared. Nothing can resist a black hole. But the swarm had learned to create their own gravity fields that canceled out the artificial black holes. What should have been crushing weapons became gentle pushes that barely moved. The enemy ships, the Sylvani bioships, fared no better. The swarm developed metal-eating bacteria that consumed the living projectiles before they could explode. Acid-resistant coatings appeared on swarm hulls. The beautiful dance of the bioships turned into a desperate fight for survival as the enemy learned to predict their movements. On the Defiance, Tony Silva monitored the increasingly worried communications between alien ships. What had started? As Victory Chance was becoming desperate status reports. Captain, Amy said, the alien fleet is reporting weapon effectiveness dropping by 60%. Some of their most advanced weapons aren't working at all anymore. Carol looked up from her tactical display with wide eyes. Sir, the swarm isn't just adapting. It's learning from every single shot, and it's learning fast. The tide of battle turned within 3 hours. The swarm, which had been taking massive losses, suddenly became almost immune to the alien weapons. Worse, they began firing back with weapons that looked suspiciously like improved versions of what the aliens had been using. Quantum torpedoes with enhanced reality-tearing effects shot from swarm ships toward the Krathen fleet. Phase strikes that came from directions the Ethereals didn't know existed began hitting their vessels. Gravity weapons more powerful than anything the Brutaxi had built started crushing the siege. Platforms. The swarm had taken the aliens' best weapons and made them better. Admiral Zexstar's voice cracked over the communications channel. All ships, fall back to defensive positions. Repeat, fall back. But falling back didn't help. The swarm followed, pressing their attack with weapons that grew more effective by the minute. Every shot the aliens fired gave the enemy more information. Every tactic they tried was countered within hours. The Krathen lost their first dreadnought to their own quantum torpedo technology, improved and fired back at them. The massive ship simply stopped existing, leaving only empty space, where 8,000 crew members had been moments before. The Ethereals found their phase space compromised. As the swarm learned to attack them in dimensions they thought were secret, ethereal ships began falling back into normal space, their reality-bending powers useless against an enemy that could bend reality better than they could. War Prime Gorth watched 3 of his siege platforms get crushed by gravity weapons that made his own look like toys. This is not possible. He screamed. We are the masters of gravitational warfare. But the swarm had become better masters in a matter of hours. Chancellor Kylin's bioships tried to retreat, but found the swarm had developed biological weapons that made their living hulls turn against them. Ships that had been alive for centuries began dying as mechanical viruses ate them from the inside. All ships, emergency retreat, Admiral Zextar ordered. Fall back to Rally Point Beta. But the swarm followed them there too, and every weapon fired in desperation only made the enemy stronger. From their position in the rear guard, the crew of the Defiance watched the systematic destruction of the greatest fleet ever assembled. The aliens who had mocked humanity's single ship were now fleeing from an enemy that had turned their own weapons against them. Dr. Nancy Wright, the ship's medical officer, began receiving evacuation pods from destroyed alien vessels. Each survivor told the same story. No matter what they tried, the enemy was always one step ahead. "Captain," Chris said quietly, "should we help them?" Jack Ryan continued watching the battle with the same calm expression he had worn since the beginning. "Not yet, Mr. Morgan, not yet." The greatest military minds in the galaxy had just learned that bigger weapons and stronger armor meant nothing against an enemy that could make them better. The giants were falling, one by one, and the universe was about to discover that sometimes the smallest ship carried the biggest surprise. The alien fleet was dying. What had once been the greatest military force in galactic history was now scattered wreckage floating through space. Ships that had survived thousands of battles were being torn apart by their own weapons, improved, and turned against them. Admiral Zextar's voice cracked over the emergency channels. "All surviving ships, retreat to emergency coordinates. This is not a battle. This is slaughter." High Curator Velenathi's ethereal ships were flickering in and out of reality, trying to escape into dimensions the swarm could no longer reach. But the enemy had learned too much. Phase space itself was compromised. War Prime Gorth's remaining siege platforms formed a desperate circle, firing everything they had at the approaching swarm. But their gravity weapons were now useless, and the enemy's improved versions were crushing Brutaxi ships like empty cans. Chancellor Kylin's bioships were in the worst shape of all. The living vessels were screaming as mechanical viruses ate them alive. Some ships were trying to die rather than be consumed by the enemy's biological weapons. On the bridge of the Defiance, the human crew watched the destruction with growing horror. Hundreds of alien ships had been destroyed in just a few hours. The swarm was pressing forward, adapting to every desperate tactic the aliens tried. "Captain," Amy Collins said, "we're receiving dozens of distress calls. The alien fleet is completely broken." Communications Officer Tony Silva looked up from his station. "Sir, some of the alien survivors are asking if we have room for evacuees." Dr. Nancy Wright was already busy in the medical bay, treating wounded aliens from ships that had managed to launch escape pods before being destroyed. Each survivor told the same impossible story. The enemy had somehow made their own weapons better than they were. "Captain," Carol Hayes said from her navigation station, "long-range sensors are picking up swarm units heading our way. I think they finally noticed us." On the main view screen, a group of mechanical ships separated from the main swarm and began moving toward the rear guard. They looked like metal sharks, sleek and deadly, with weapons that glowed with stolen alien technology. Chris Morgan checked his tactical display. 12 units approaching. They're using what looks like Krathen quantum torpedoes and ethereal phase drives. How long until they reach us? Jack asked calmly. 8 minutes, sir. Amy opened a channel to the alien flagships. "This is the U.E.'s Defiance. We are engaging the enemy. All allied ships, please stand by." Admiral Zextar's voice exploded over the channel. "What? Human ship, retreat immediately. You cannot fight them. They will adapt to your weapons in minutes." "We understand the risk," Jack replied. "This is madness," War Prime Gorth roared. "Your small ship will be destroyed instantly." High Curator Velenathi's voice carried genuine sadness. "Captain Ryan, please do not throw your lives away. This enemy cannot be defeated with conventional weapons." Jack looked around his bridge at his crew. Each of them was watching him with calm eyes. There was no fear, no panic, just quiet determination. "Mr. Clark," Jack said to his weapons officer, "bring all systems online." Ben Clark's hands moved over his controls. "Aye, sir. All weapon systems active." But something strange happened. Instead of the normal weapon readouts, Ben's display showed completely different information. Energy readings fluctuated wildly. Weapon configurations changed every few seconds. Nothing looked like standard human technology. "Sir," Ben said with a slight smile, "chaos field generators are operating normally. All randomization protocols are active." Jack nodded. "Ms. Park, take us to intercept course. Random evasion pattern 7. Pilot Linda Park's hands danced over her controls. "Random evasion pattern 7. Aye, sir. Though I should mention, I have no idea what that pattern will actually look like." "That's the point, Miss Park." Engineer Kate Thompson's voice came over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, all modified systems are green. The chaos field is stable at maximum randomness. Every shot will be completely unique." The approaching swarm units slowed as they got closer to the human ship. Their sensors were scanning the Defiance, trying to analyze its capabilities. But they were finding something they had never encountered before. Every sensor sweep gave them different information. The ship's weapons seemed to change from second to second. The shield configuration shifted constantly. Even the ship's mass readings fluctuated randomly. "What are they doing?" Amy asked, watching the swarm ships on her display. "They're confused," Jack said. "For the first time in this battle, they're facing something they can't analyze." The swarm ships opened fire first. Quantum torpedoes shot toward the Defiance, torpedoes that had been adapted from the most advanced Krathan weapons. They should have torn the small human ship apart. Instead, they missed completely. Linda Park had thrown the ship into an evasion pattern that made no sense. The Defiance spun, rolled, and twisted through space in movements that followed no mathematical formula. The swarm's targeting computers, which had learned to predict every alien ship's movements, could not predict something that was truly random. "Return fire," Jack ordered. Ben Clark pressed his firing controls, and something impossible happened. The Defiance fired 3 different types of weapons at the same time, all of them completely different from what the ship had fired a second earlier. One was a particle beam that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions. Another was a projectile that changed its mass and speed while flying. The third was some kind of energy pulse that the swarm sensors couldn't even identify. All 3 shots hit different swarm ships, and all 3 had completely different effects. One swarm ship simply exploded. Another began spinning uncontrollably as its navigation systems failed. The third started firing its own weapons randomly, as if its targeting computer had gone insane. "Direct hits," Ben reported, "though I couldn't tell you exactly what we hit them with." The surviving swarm ships tried to return fire again, but their targeting solutions were already useless. The Defiance's evasion pattern had changed to something completely different. Their adapted weapons, which should have been perfect counters to human technology, found nothing to counter. "Sir," Chris said with wonder in his voice, "they can't adapt to us. Every time they try to analyze our weapons, we're firing something different." Jack nodded. "Mr. Turner, explain to our alien guests what they're seeing." Tactical Officer Alex Turner activated the communication system. Several alien survivors were listening from the medical bay, along with the alien flagships that were watching in amazement. "The problem with the Void Swarm," Alex said calmly, is that they learn from patterns. Every weapon has a signature. Every tactic has a formula. But what if there are no patterns to learn? On the view screen, the Defiance fired again. This time, the weapons were completely different from before. A swarm ship that had just adapted to resist particle beams was hit by some kind of temporal weapon that aged its hull to dust in seconds. Chaos field technology, Alex continued. Every shot we fire is random at the quantum level. Every defensive measure works differently each time. There are no patterns, because the patterns change constantly. Engineer Mike Patterson's voice joined. From the engine room. We spent 50 years studying randomness, while other species built bigger guns. True randomness cannot be predicted, analyzed, or countered. The swarm ships were now firing desperately at empty space. Their targeting systems, which had easily adapted to alien weapons, were giving them conflicting information about the human ship. Some sensors said the Defiance was in front of them. Others said it was behind them. A few insisted it didn't exist at all. They're confused, Amy reported. Their formation is breaking up. Some of them are firing at each other. Indeed, the swarm units were beginning to turn on themselves. Their adaptation protocols were receiving so much contradictory data about human weapons that they were generating conflicting responses. One ship would adapt to resist energy weapons, just as another adapted to resist projectiles, and their defensive systems would interfere with each other. The impossible was happening. For the first time since the battle began, the Void Swarm was not adapting. Instead, it was getting more confused with every passing minute. Admiral Zextar's voice came over the communications channel, filled with amazement. How is this possible? Your ship is destroying units that adapted to our most advanced weapons. Simple, Jack replied. You can't adapt to something that's different every time. As the last swarm ships in the hunting group destroyed themselves. In confusion, something even more remarkable began to happen. Throughout the main swarm, contradictory adaptation signals were spreading like a virus. The enemy that had seemed unstoppable was starting to fight itself. The confusion was spreading. Throughout the vast void swarm, adaptation protocols were failing as contradictory data flooded their network. Units that had successfully learned to counter alien weapons were now receiving impossible information about human technology that changed faster than they could process. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Jack Ryan watched his tactical display with satisfaction. The chaos field was working exactly as planned. Every shot his ship fired sent new randomized data through the swarm's communication network, and their collective intelligence was choking on information that made no sense. Sir, Communications Officer Amy Collins reported, we're getting signals from Admiral Zextar. The Kraken are requesting permission to resume their attack. Jack nodded. Tell them to begin firing. All Allied ships are cleared to engage. What happened next amazed every alien commander who witnessed it. The quantum torpedoes that had become useless hours earlier suddenly began working again. The Kraken weapons tore through swarm ships that should have been immune to them. But the swarm's adaptation network was too busy trying to process impossible human weapon data to counter the renewed alien assault. Admiral Zextar's voice boomed over the communications channel. Impossible. Our weapons are effective again. How is this happening? Engineer Kate Thompson's voice came from the Defiance's engine room. The swarm's adaptation network is overloaded. They're getting so much contradictory data about our weapons that they can't process anything else properly. High Curator Valinathi's ethereal ships began their phase strikes again. The reality-bending attacks that had been countered were now working perfectly. Swarm ships that should have been protected found themselves being attacked from dimensions they thought were secure. The swarm appears to have forgotten how to defend against our attacks. Valinathi's voice carried wonder. It is as if their learning has been reversed. War Prime Gorth's siege platforms opened fire with their gravity crushers. The black hole weapons that had been turned against them were now devastating the enemy once more. Entire sections of the swarm were pulled into artificial gravity wells and crushed to nothing. Ha! Gorth roared with joy. They cannot resist the might of Brutaxi weapons, but how have they become vulnerable again? Chancellor Keelan's bioships rejoined the battle, their living weapons working with deadly efficiency. The mechanical viruses that had nearly destroyed them were somehow inactive, as if the swarm had forgotten how to use biological warfare. Our living ships are reporting that the enemy's biological countermeasures have simply stopped working, the Chancellor said in amazement. It is as if they have forgotten everything they learned. On the Defiance, Tactical Officer Chris Morgan was monitoring the swarm's communications. Captain, their network traffic is completely chaotic. They're sending adaptation signals that contradict each other. Some units are trying to defend against weapons that don't exist, while others are leaving themselves completely open to attacks they should be able to counter. Pilot Linda. Park spun their ship through another impossible evasion pattern. More swarm ships fired at where they thought the Defiance would be, only to hit empty space. Each missed shot added more confused data to the swarm's overloaded network. Sir Weapons Officer Ben Clark said, "Should I target their command nodes?" Jack studied the tactical display. Massive swarm ships the size of small moons were trying to coordinate the failing network. But even they seemed confused by the contradictory information flowing through their systems. Fire at will, Mr. Clark. Random targeting pattern. Ben's hands moved over his controls, and the Defiance fired weapons that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. The shots hit 3 different command nodes, each with a completely different effect. One node simply exploded. Another began broadcasting random signals to its own ships. The third started attacking nearby swarm units as if they were enemies. The effect was immediate and devastating. With their command structure compromised by random data, the swarm's coordination collapsed entirely. Units that should have been working together began firing at each other. Ships that had adapted to specific threats found themselves vulnerable to completely different attacks. All ships, press the attack, Admiral Zextar commanded. Drive them back. The combined alien fleet surged forward. Weapons that had been useless for hours were now cutting through swarm defenses like they were made of paper. The enemy that had seemed unstoppable was suddenly helpless against the very tactics they had already defeated. Dr. Nancy Wright watched from the medical bay as alien survivors cheered. Wounded Krathan warriors were standing up in their beds, celebrating their fleet's renewed effectiveness. Ethereal beings flickered with joy as their phase strikes found their marks. Even the injured Brutaxi were pounding their fists in triumph. The little human ship has saved us all, one of the Sylvani survivors whispered in wonder. The battle turned into a rout. The Void Swarm, which had conquered entire star systems, was being systematically destroyed by the same weapons it had learned to counter. Their adaptation network, poisoned by random data from the human ship, could no longer protect them from anything. Swarm ships began retreating, but even their retreat was chaotic. Units moved in random directions, following conflicting orders from confused command nodes. Many collided with each other as their navigation systems received contradictory data about where they should go. "Sir," Carol Hayes reported from her navigation station, "the main swarm body is breaking apart. They're fleeing in all directions." "Let them go," Jack said calmly. "They won't be able to coordinate another attack. Their network will take years to recover from this, if it ever does." As the last swarm ships disappeared into deep space, the alien fleet regrouped. For the first time in hours, the communications channels carried celebration instead of desperation. Admiral Zextar was the First, contact the Defiance directly. Captain Ryan, he said, his voice filled with respect, I owe you an apology. We all do. Your species has saved the galaxy. High Curator Velenathi's ethereal voice carried amazement. In all our eons of existence, we have never seen such elegant strategy. You solved an impossible problem with pure innovation. War Prime. Gorth's apology was characteristically direct. I called your ship small and useless. I was wrong. Size means nothing when wisdom guides the weapons. Chancellor Kylin's message was the most thoughtful. Captain, your people understood something we did not. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from power, but from thinking differently. Communications Officer Tony Silva looked up from his station. Sir, we're receiving messages from surviving ships throughout the fleet. They're all requesting to know more about our technology and tactics. Jack smiled slightly. Tell them we'll be happy to share our methods. But first, let's get everyone home safely. As the combined fleet began forming up for the journey back to their home worlds, the mood was completely different from when they had first assembled. The species that had mocked humanity's single ship were now treating the small human crew as heroes. On the bridge of the Defiance, the crew watched the alien ships taking protective positions around them. The same commanders who had assigned them to the rear guard were now insisting that the human ship take the place of honor at the center of the formation. Captain, Amy said, Admiral Zextar is requesting permission to escort us back to Earth. He says it would be an honor. Jack looked around his bridge at his crew. They had done something no one thought possible. They had defeated an enemy that had never been beaten, not through superior firepower, but through superior thinking. Tell the Admiral we'd be honored to have his escort, Jack said. And Amy, send a message to Earth. Tell them the galaxy is safe and humanity has earned its place among the stars. As the great fleet moved toward home, carrying news of humanity's triumph, Captain Jack Ryan stood quietly on his bridge. The galaxy had mocked their one ship. Now they understood why one ship was all humanity had needed to send. Sometimes the smallest key opens the largest door. And sometimes the best weapon is the one nobody expects.